With National Autism Awareness Day coming up pretty soon, I wanted to get more info on the illness. So I sent out some emails and I got a reply from James Adams, who is a President's Professor and the Director of the Autism and Asperger's Research Program at Arizona State University. He spent a couple of minutes with me to explain what the illness exactly is and how it can be treated.
I've spent my life pushing myself to be the strongest, and now I learn there's a power level I'll never reach on my own. And I hate that.
My first question for you would be, what is autism?
Autism is a developmental disorder which affects children, and it affects primarily three areas. It affects their language and ability to communicate. It affects their social interaction and ability to understand social issues. And finally, it affects their behavior. People with autism tend to have restricted or stereotypic interests and behaviors.
You've mentioned some signs. Can you mention any additional signs that come with having autism?
Okay. Those are the three core areas of autism, and the autism is a spectrum disorder, and so it can go from very mild to very extreme. So, for example, with language and communication, on one extreme, you have people who cannot talk, do not even understand what is said to them. On the other end, you can have people who can seemingly converse reasonably, have a reasonable vocabulary and grammar. When you talk to them, you notice that they may tend to focus on the same topic over and over again, or they may not have very good understanding of the concept of a conversation. They may talk at you. They may not be able to understand the back and forth, the give and take of a conversation. So they want to talk at you maybe about their special interests, or they may have trouble understanding the big picture of what it is you're saying.
Okay. When it comes to the autism spectrum disorder, how does Asperger's fall into that? Is it a lesser form? Is it related at all?
People with Asperger's have generally a reasonable level of language, but they still have the same social challenges, same behavioral issues. It's generally considered to be a mild form of autism. The new diagnostic manual, DSM-5, lists it includes it as just part of autism spectrum disorders.
Okay.
The difference is just in the language ability primarily.
Are there any genetic factors that increase the chances of a potential parent or parents having an autistic child?
There are multiple ways to answer that. If parents have one child with autism, then there's about a 15 to 20% chance that any additional children they have will also develop autism. So it's very important, if they have one child on the spectrum, to have all of their children be screened. Because even if they don't have autism, they're going to be at a higher risk of speech delays and other developmental delays.
Okay.
In terms of genes, autism is partly due to genetics and partly due to the environment in a complex way. That something in your genes tends to make you vulnerable to something in the environment. In about 10 to 20% of cases, autism is primarily due to a single gene disorder, such as Fragile X. But for any of these single gene disorders, even if you have that single gene disorder like Fragile X, there's only about a 50-50 chance at most that you will have autism. There are single gene disorders that make you at high risk of having autism, but again, someone can still have Fragile X and not have autism.
Okay.
In about 80 to 90% of cases, there is no single gene disorder. Rather, it's a very complex interaction of probably many different genes, some of which have been identified, most of which we're really pretty clueless about.
My final question would be, how would you treat autism, and what are some tips you would give to family members and friends who have somebody who is autistic in their lives?
Okay. Actually, about 10 to 20% of people do eventually lose their diagnosis of autism. There are a large number of treatments out there, such as behavioral therapies like ABA. Research studies have shown that up to 50% of people who receive ABA therapy will lose their diagnosis of autism. So it may not necessarily say a cure, but we'll say that they lose their diagnosis. They improve to the point it'd no longer be considered to have a significant disability.
Okay.
There are also many medical and nutritional interventions, and that's the sort of work that I'm involved with.
Okay. So you're saying that there's hope for people who are autistic to eventually lose that diagnosis?
Right. So clearly, there are treatments out there which are effective for many people, some more so than others. Only a relatively small percentage will go on to lose their diagnosis, but many people, through behavioral, medical, nutritional therapies, will go on to lead better lives, happier lives. They'll be able to increase their language, their social understanding, etc. And also, it's important to know we're now learning what are the causes of autism in terms of how to prevent it. So we know that if women take a prenatal at conception, then they will have a 40% lower risk of having a child with autism. Okay. So we're learning a lot about the prevention side as well.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this episode, you can check out my most recent episode over here, which discusses Harvard Extension School, the school I'm currently trying to get into, and the stigmas that are associated with it. Harvard Extension School offers bachelor's degrees in liberal arts and master's degrees in liberal arts in extension studies. And if you've enjoyed any of the videos that I've done on this channel, you can go ahead and subscribe. You can go ahead and subscribe.